We'll call the meeting to order, and today we're going to have the GMD show, so to speak, and we'll begin with Sean Miller. Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the microphone is on. My name is Sean Miller. I am with Capital Strategies, a lobby firm here in town, but I represent 3 of the 5 GMDs, so we kind of have a mixed bag here today. I actually represent GMDs number 1, 3, and 4. So we're going to have a little bit of everybody sort of show and tell today. Mr. Kyle Spencer, who's the district manager from GMD 1, which is out in Representative Minix's area. They actually have a board meeting this morning starting at 9 a.m., so he couldn't be here and asked me to give just a quick overview for them. But what I thought might be helpful for the committee first is just a 2-minute, maybe an even less overview of GMDs, how we got here, where we are. The state legislature in 1972 passed the GMD Act, which allowed local groundwater management districts, or in fact local citizens, to petition to form a local groundwater management district to have some management goals, roles, and destiny with their local water sources. So as you look at the map we have on the screen here, you'll actually see the location of the 5 GMDs within the state of Kansas. We get a lot of questions from people about, I live in Hodgman County or I live in Southern Lane County. Why am I not in a GMD when my neighbor is? If you were to overlay this map with the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer map that you've seen from earlier presenters this year, you'd figure out pretty quick. So there's not a lot of groundwater there in Southern Lane or Hodgman County, and so that's why you're not a part of a GMD. So 1972, legislature passed the GMD Act. It allowed them to organize. It allowed them to elect a local board of directors of not less than 3 board of directors. And it provided, they're essentially a quasi-municipality. So they have some finance authority. That the budgets are built for GMDs basically on a 5-cent per acre land assessment for property within the GMD. That's a little bit limited, so it's not all property. It's 40 contiguous acres, not within a city, et cetera, and for an assessment per acre foot of water that is withdrawn from the district. So I know you guys have sort of drank from the fire hose on acronyms, and I worked after KCD on Monday to put together an acronym sheet for you. So hopefully that was helpful. But just to give a couple of quick perspectives on some of the terms you'll hear today. Number 1, acre foot is the volume of water that we usually talk about in Western water law. An acre foot is actually 325,851 gallons of water. So roughly 325,000 gallons of water, or enough to fill 1 acre of ground 1 foot deep. That's the volume metric. For those maybe who are not as familiar with acres and maybe are a little more urban, it's about half the volume of an Olympic swimming pool. So I like sort of visual. I'm a visual person, so about 2 acre feet would be about 1 Olympic-sized swimming pool. The other thing that you'll hear today, maybe a lot, is saturated thickness. And so as you hear from the various GMDs on their various challenges or the longevity of the water, you hear them talk about saturated thickness. When we talk about groundwater, people don't often understand it's not just a big underground swimming pool, despite the visual that I just gave you of a swimming pool. It is deeper in some places, it's shallower in some places. The depth to water, or the thickness in this particular case, you may be 10 feet under the ground before you hit water, but then maybe you have 100 feet of water, right? So from 10 feet to 110 feet, you have water that's all mixed in with mud and sand and rock. And again, it's not sort of this vast pool of underground water. There's a lot of different things mixed in there. So as we talk about saturated thickness, just keep in mind that that is sort of the depth of water that exists underneath the ground. In the eastern parts of the GMDs, on a good day like today where we've got a lot of water, you might be able to get to water with a spoon. I mean, it may be inches under the ground. Whereas in far southwest Kansas, it may be several hundred feet before you get to the water table. It varies a lot, and so the GMDs were formed based on sort of those variances, those unique challenges to their area, and as they talk today, I think you'll hear about some of those unique challenges. In addition to that nickel per acre assessment I told you about, in 1972, the GMDs were able to assess 30 cents per acre foot withdrawn. That number has gradually increased, that cap has, and the various districts utilize, based on their water resources and how much water is withdrawn, varying amounts underneath that cap, right? So 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, Tim will remember better than me, we raised the cap to the $2 per acre foot is the allowable amount that they can be assessed for water used within their district. We have GMDs that basically assess from, 20 cents an acre feet all the way to that $2, depending on their unique needs, what their problems are, whether they're dealing with high-cost pollution issues or whether they're just working on water technology. And so you'll hear that from the various districts today. To get to GMD 1 now, since Kyle is not here, just to give you a broad overview, GMD 1, not surprisingly, carries the number 1 because they were the first one formed. They were formed May 1st of 1973, and they represent 5 districts there in the west central part of the state of Kansas. So they're based out of Scott City, and they include all or parts of those 5 counties there from Wallace, Greeley, Wichita, Scott, and Lane counties. The budget for GMD 1 is approximately $430,000 per year. Every year, the board of directors sets a budget. They go to a public hearing, they vote on that budget, and the assessment is set accordingly to meet that budgetary need. So this year, the GMD 1 assessment for water is 60 cents per acre feet out of that allowable $2 per acre feet. To just quickly talk to you about a couple of the things that GMD1 has been working on. Probably first and foremost, in February of this year, the chief engineer issued an order approving the Wichita County LEMA. I am not going to get into LEMAs very much right now because Shannon Kenyon with GMD4 is sort of our LEMA expert in the room today, so I'm going to leave a lot of those details for her. But needless to say, GMD1 attempted a LEMA back in 2014. They attempted a district-wide LEMA, and of the 5 counties, only 3 of the 5 counties approved it, so it didn't move forward. This past year, Wichita County, which you'll see they have a number of water conservation areas as well, came back again and said, okay, we want to do just a county-wide LEMA now. We have some localized concerns, and we'd really like to cut back on water to preserve the life of the aquifer. And so we now have the Wichita County LEMA. A lot of the activities of GMD1 as well, if you look down the GMD1 testimony, has been about cost share for irrigation technologies and for water measuring technologies. So over the last 4 years combined, the GMD has a budget of about $450,000 for water cost share projects, of which they've spent about $375,000 of that. And that would include everything from moisture probes so that we understand in our irrigation cycle whether we actually need to water today, right? Is there enough subsurface moisture that today perhaps we don't need to water? We don't need to turn on that pivot. We don't need to run gas or electricity, and we don't need to be pumping water unnecessarily. And other days we know that we do. So a little bit better technology to guide our irrigation assistance. In addition, we have weather stations, lower elevation irrigation. For those of us who grew up, maybe in the city running through sprinklers as a little kid, you water high and a lot of that water evaporates or just runs off before it gets down to the water, before it gets down to the ground. But if you irrigate really low, and so you either drip irrigation or low-level sprinklers, that water gets directly into the soil. It's a lot more efficient use of water. So those are a couple of the things that we have there. GMD1 does currently have 6 water conservation areas as well. I think WCAs is maybe the one acronym in our presentation today that I didn't get on the KACD acronym sheet from Monday. So if you see WCAs, those are water conservation areas. Those are essentially much smaller landowner or producer-driven areas of conservation. So maybe 3 or 4 landowners, or maybe even just one landowner who has a big chunk of land wants to get some flexibility within his program and trade off less water use overall as an ability to get into that WCA. So I think you're going to hear a lot of stuff today. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Bass with GMD2, if that's okay at this time. And I'm happy to stand for questions at any time. If the committee wants to take them throughout the presenters, or if you want to save them till the end, that's obviously, we're very flexible there. Orrin Farrell will be presenting via WebEx. He's with GMD5. He'll be the last presenter today as well. So,
all I need to know is if you have a presentation, so I have time to go find it and get it ready. So,
and just as a quick heads up there, I think GMD2 does, which is up on the screen. GMD3 does as well. GMD4 and 5 do not. So once we get through the next 2 presenters, I think that should be all of the PowerPoints.
So the one up now is the one you want. Okay, here we go. And please introduce yourself for the audience and take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Hyman and members of the committee. My name is Tim Bays. I'm the manager of the Equisbeds Groundwater Management District in Halstead, Kansas. Starting my 30th year of being with the district, I believe. Started in February of 1992, so I'm going to try to keep this to to 10 minutes or less, but I've been there for a long time, so I've seen a lot. But again, appreciate you running the slide, Representative Highland. That's the map of the districts that are up there right now. I already talked about that. GMD2 would be the furthest east one, which I guess is the pink color. And then if you'll go to the next slide. And I think, as Sean said, there's obvious reasons why the district is where they are at. If you look at where the High Plains Aquifer and the Ogallala are, it's pretty obvious with the three Western Kansas and Ogallala, and then the GMD 5 and 2 in the High Plains. Are we getting an echo? That gonna help? That help? Okay. Yep. Sound like we're getting an echo. If we go to the next slide, I'm gonna try to blast through these in 10 minutes if I can. Again, the district was formed in 1975, and I won't go through all the purposes and goals and of all that, but essentially it was twofold. One was safe yield. Wanted to make sure we weren't mining the aquifer. I think the stakeholders in the steering committee wanted to form a district because they saw what was happening statewide with the amount of development that was occurring, sort of an uncontrolled water permit development at the time, and they had great concerns for the Equisbeds aquifer and wanted to maintain that. And then also, as far as our second reason for existence is really water quality. We have a number of water quality challenges, which I'll get to in a minute. If we go to the next, Representative Highland. Are we still getting an echo? Further? Does that help? There we go. I don't know if you've, maybe some of you have seen this particular map. This shows the amount of decline in the aquifer, for instance, since pre-development through the average of 2015 through 2017. The browns are where we're seeing the declines out in western Kansas, but if you focus on the south central part of the state, you're really seeing where we're not having declines. We have a few minor challenges in our district with some slight declines, but if you look at the map, the tans and the blues are actually either rises or slight declines. So really, we're talking about two different stories here, western Kansas compared to south central Kansas. So we'll go to the next thing. Thank you. Just wanted to touch base real quick. The district did expand its boundaries in 2017. We've actually expanded our boundaries twice. We were formed in 75, expanded in 88, and then expanded again in 2017 to what you see today. And if we'll go to the next. This is a real busy map. This shows all the permitted wells in the district, along with our average annual usage is about 174,000 acre feet. That's about 57 billion gallons per year. And I think what makes the GMD2 unique is our breakdown. Irrigation is the main use in our district, but we have a huge municipal use, mainly because we have the city of Wichita, as well as Hutchinson, Newton, McPherson, and a number of small communities. We serve over around 550,000 people for drinking water. So that's really unique for GMD2, where the other GMDs are more rural.
Can you explain? Speak into the microphone so everybody can hear you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain the red dot and the green dot, particularly the red dot that you have on your graph there of bank storage? I think I kind of understand that. But it would be nice if you explained those two dots that are on your graph there, please.
Yeah, so the city of Wichita has a recharge project, and they have a number of different ways that they can take water during high flows out of the Little Arkansas, and one of those is bank storage wells. So when the Ark River comes up, you get a transfer of that surface water into the groundwater. They can then pump that bank storage water and recharge it into the aquifer as a recharge project. Does that answer your question? Yeah, they also have a big surface intake, but they have two ways to do it: bank storage wells along the Arkansas River or a direct surface intake. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. So where along that is it used to call Valley Center floodplain. It's renamed now, but where on your map is that floodplain, and is that floodplain help fill those storage areas? Yeah,
maybe I have a map toward the end, I think, that will show maybe more where that City Wichita recharge project is. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, I'll hold and I'll maybe show that a little bit when we get to that. We'll go on to the next one, Representative Highland. Again, this is sort of emphasizing sort of our uniqueness of our district. This is a chart from 1992 through 2017 showing the average usage in the district by use category. The irrigation, again, is prominent, but of particular interest is the blue, which is a municipal use, which is going to be much higher than all the other districts probably combined. Sean talked about budget. We are at $2 an acre foot. We are at the maximum allowable, and it's based on this water usage and the amount permitted. Our budget for 2021 is about $808,000. This is somewhat unusually high right now for our budget. It's usually more in the $500,000 range. And the reason for that is because of the City of Wichita's recharge project. We are going through a hearing process, which has caused us to spend an incredible amount of money on legal fees and consulting fees. As soon as that hearing process is over, I anticipate we will lower our assessment rate and our budget back to something more normal. If you'll go on, Representative Hunt. This is our monitoring wells in our district. We own and maintain over 500 monitoring wells that the district either installed or inherited. We probably are the most monitored area in the state, partly because of that high municipal use and also because of our water quality challenges. And if you go on, Representative Hunt. Just a quick, we monitor multiple locations at each site. So we have different depths of monitoring wells, and the water quality and water level can be significantly different. So oftentimes we have clusters of monitoring wells. At one site, we may have up to 4 monitoring wells at each site. If you'll go on, Representative Hunt. We also take an extraordinary amount of water level measurements annually, about 2,900 on average. We upload all that into the Kansas Geological Survey website. This is actually a site here in Harvey County. You can see our ups and downs, sort of our cyclical measurements, but the overall trend at that location is very, very stable. And if we go on, Representative Highland. We also take a vast number of samples from our monitoring wells annually, as well as some permitted wells. We usually collect around 300 samples per year, although it can be more than that if we're in a special project. This one in particular is showing a chloride level in the Burton area, which has a oil field brine contamination, and you can see over time the chlorides have escalated quite significantly in that area, way above the drinking water and usable standard. But we do this for all of our monitoring wells in these chloride impacted areas. If we go on, Representative Highland. And this is real busy, so I think probably some of you have heard about the Burton Intensive Groundwater Use Control Area and having chloride issues. That's not our only problem in the district. We have a number of oil field contaminated areas and other contamination, but I just wanted to show that there's a whole lot going on water quality wise in the district. We have monitoring wells in most of these locations and that are sampled annually to monitor what those contamination plumes are doing. And if we'll go on, Representative Highland. I wanted to touch base just a little bit on some of our special management areas. I think Professor Griggs yesterday made some remarks about GMDs perhaps not doing what we should be doing. I wanted to counter that a little bit. Our district has been very proactive. We had the first intensive groundwater use control area in 1980. That was in the McPherson area due to declining water levels. To close that area to new appropriations. We also have the Burton Iguka, which is shown up as purple. And then the Hollow Nickel Special Water Quality Use Area in the green. Those are water quality management areas for that oil field brine contamination. And then in the southwest corner, and about a decade or so ago, we looked at that area. We saw a thin saturated thickness area. It was being very heavily developed. That's sort of the Pretty Prairie to Partridge area. So we changed our regulations to require wells to be spaced further apart in that area. And we also have a number of folks taking advantage of the multi-year flex account. My last count, I think we were over 40, but we have a number of pending, so I think we're probably in the 50 to 60 range on the multi-year flex accounts. And if we go on, Representative Highland. I'll talk just real quick about the aquifer storage and recovery project since I had the question. If you want to go on one more. And this map is showing really why there is a recharge project. That yellow at a decline area, that's the Wichita Wellfield area. We had declines up to 40 feet, and then we had salinity moving towards their salt contamination from the Burton area and from the Ark River. If you'll go on one more. And then if you look at the city of Wichita wellfield area, those are all the red triangles. And I think that maybe will help you understand where that Wichita or that Valley Center floodway is. So it's sort of bounded by the Arkansas and Little Arkansas River. City of Wichita has 55 wells, 40,000 acre feet in old, what I call old native water rights. Then if you'll go one more. And again, a very, very busy map here, but the City of Wichita has gone through 2 phases of the recharge project. The first was the bank storage wells, where they're taking the high flows from bank storage wells. The second was a big surface intake close to Sedgwick that also takes those high flows, treats it, and injects that into the aquifer for their later use. We're in a hearing process right now. The city had asked for some changes to their permits, which we do not agree with, so we've gone through a hearing process in front of a special hearing officer that was appointed by the chief engineer. We're about 2 years into that, and the oral arguments just wrapped up, so we're waiting for an outcome on that, and I can answer some questions on that if needed, but I think I'll close with that because I think I'm probably at my 10 minutes.
Well, I think what we'll do is, if it's okay with presenters, we'll hold our questions till we get done. That way, and then we'll tag team whoever can answer the question, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Now, I need to find another presentation, right? Yes. Okay. Hang on. Forgot to ask it to share. Is that what I did wrong?
There it is. Wonderful. Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving us some time to talk today as Groundwater Management Districts. Vice Chairman Orr, members of the committee, my name is Mark Rood. I'm Executive Director for the Southwest Kansas Groundwater Management District, officed in Garden City. And we're sort of going in contrast here from GMD2, which is the smallest geographically, to GMD3 in Southwest Kansas, which is the largest. We pump the most water to create the biggest portion of the agricultural economy, gross state product for Kansas. In my testimony, I start off and talk about the history. I'll sort of skip over that, but to say, Tim mentioned they had the first intensive groundwater use control area. We, in 1977, when I graduated from high school, and I tend to want to talk right into it, so if that's too much, I'll stand back in the mic. But when I graduated from high school, the Groundwater Management District number 3 asked the chief engineer for a moratorium on for an area along the Ark River because it was just getting so heavily developed. Remember, this is at a time when, under the Water Appropriations Act, citizens had the right to file for and establish a water right, but they didn't have to. That didn't happen until 1978. But in 1977, we were just looking at the inevitable demand on water supply in Kansas, but also in Colorado, and thinking, well, we've got to get our house in order before we start complaining upstream. And so we asked for a moratorium in Kearney and Finney counties. And the chief engineer granted that. When we formed under the 1972 GMD Act, we formed in 1976, and then immediately went to work to try to address the water supply and overappropriation problems. We did the moratorium. We lobbied the legislature to say, look, we can't manage what we don't measure. We don't know how much water is being used out there, and so we lobbied for mandatory water rights, and we've got that. The legislature granted that in 1978. And since then, it's been a long litany of local leadership asking for what's really needed in order to manage what we have regarding water supply and its influence on the economy. Next slide.
If you'd pull that microphone down just a little bit, appreciate it. There you go.
So I want to just, as far as slides, I want to just emphasize the importance of GMDs, local water policy leadership, the management program, and then a couple of examples real quick on problems and thinking. Next slide. I'm not sure how well this will come up, but again, this is a slide of water use for non-domestic use. If you look at a domestic slide, of course, domestic wells are across the state. But where the major aquifers are, we've developed the large capacity supply. And under a charge that the legislature put in the Water Appropriations Act, basically providing a duty to the chief engineer to grant water appropriations to the extent that the maximum benefit and utilization of the water resources of the state can be achieved. And obviously, we got to cutting checks as a state, and then local people said, time out, we need some local say and local input. As I described earlier, the rest is history regarding the leadership from the groundwater management districts. Groundwater is important to Kansas. Next slide, please. What I did here was to sort of overlay the groundwater areas with a map of the volume, sense of the volume of surface water flow. So the wider the blue line, the more flow annually that comes down that water course. So obviously you can see in the Missouri River, it's very large. Out in southwest Kansas on the Ark River coming from Colorado, there's a little bit there that appears to end about Garden City. And that, of course, is where our irrigation ditches from the 1880s take the water supply. And I think in yesterday's presentation by Professor Griggs, I believe he may have mentioned that certainly it's that historic use that actually preserved the right to some of that supply as we went forward in this working relationship with Colorado as a matter of interstate water. But we've developed that groundwater. The groundwater district formed and inherited this over-appropriation condition and started trying to find ways to reasonably reel it back in regarding what water is available for appropriation. Under the Water Appropriations Act, there's specific language that charges the chief engineer that if he's entertaining an application to appropriate and there is water available beyond what's needed to satisfy prior right demands, he's obligated to approve that application. And so the chief engineer did that historically. But somewhere on groundwater, there has to obviously be some kind of long-term view, some way of managing that supply. And that's been the conversation that we've had with the state agencies ever since. Nobody wants to see anybody lose any groundwater, but people are. Again, in contrasts, GMD2, it rains. Not only does rain make grain, but rain makes recharge into the aquifers. And if it doesn't rain so much, we're in the driest part of the state in southwest Kansas, then we make up for it with the underground rain, the pumping of the groundwater. So we pump about 2 million acre feet annually, and we get about half of that recharged back on average. So we have a gap there, and we're mining that supply. There's going to be hardship as we mine that supply. Well performance, aquifer supply, and water costs. And the question is, how are we going to deal with it? It's been the question all along. How do we deal with it? And how are we going to share the burden of shortage? You know, the local thinking is not to run to court, but to come together and figure it out, to settle. Just a classic example that goes on daily out there is someone may have a water right established for 2,000 gallons per minute. They actually did it. It was measured by the state. The certificate was issued, and they have a right to 2,000 gallons per minute and an annual quantity of water. But today, maybe their well only yields, because of aquifer decline conditions, say 600 gallons per minute. Well, they make it work. They get along. Now, in the strict application of the law, as we saw in the Garrettson case that was mentioned yesterday, Garrettson Brothers versus American Warrior, it's pretty draconian when we get into a local aquifer situation where there's a call, the user wants to secure their supply, and it shuts off the neighbors completely. Well, that's a hard pill to swallow. And our conversations with the state, on how we apply policy and the Water Appropriations Act, has been a conversation on how to manage that as we go forward. Next slide. Just as reference, I provided to you a copy of the 1973 pamphlet put out by K-State Extension promoting the formation of groundwater districts. And I think it's a useful reference for you in the context back then, and much of it is the same today. With two notable changes that the legislature put in place since then. Originally, the legislature granted the right for that local district governing body to pass enforceable rules. That's been removed since then in House Substitute for Senate Bill 287 in about 1999. The other thing that's occurred is the right of a GMD to be aggrieved. If there is a situation where the chief engineer makes a ruling and it's mysterious or the scientific basis is not disclosed, the groundwater management districts used to be able to ask for a hearing and be granted that. Today, because we don't own any of those water rights, we don't have standing. We are a person under the law, but we're not aggrieved because we don't own any water rights. And that can be a challenge. And I'll deviate just for a moment and give you an example. Stories are good. I think a euphemism yesterday that was used was the fox guarding the hen house. And I would urge Professor Griggs and others to look very carefully at who is the fox and who is the hens. Because here's an example. We had here just a year or two ago a teacher and her brother from Meade that were trying to protect their water supply to their farm. And there was an illegal well drilled nearby. And the state then proceeded to try to find a way to get it permitted. The problem was it was in an area where on one side of the state, or excuse me, one side of the section, that producer that drilled that well, he's run out of water. Again, the aquifer is not uniform and homogeneous, it varies. So the wells on the east side of the section were not producing anymore. Well, we need water, you know, and so he looked to the west side of the section, which was next to the farm of concern here, and put down a well, laid his underground pipe, and then worked to try to get it all permitted. And that's, of course, not the way the law reads. The board, as a local conscience of review, looked at this and advised the chief engineer, first of all, I won't get into the mechanisms of changes to water rights, but short of the long is, the state looked to grant an additional well to cover that well. Well, the school teacher and her brother looked at that, and their tenant, who also owned a well to the south, said, well, this is a remaining water supply in the local aquifer area, and this additional pumping is just going to further deplete that supply. It's already depleting. So they expressed their objection, their concern. The groundwater district ran some numbers, did the science, applied some guidelines for how to view that science, and said, look, this is critical well conditions. It should not be approved. Well, short of the long was, we were, that's as far as it went. We advised the chief engineer. We have no power to ask for a hearing, as we learned. The school teacher was told she could have a hearing, but she would have to hire attorneys and engineers and prove that the state was wrong. And that's a pretty heavy burden. So on we go with these changes, these reviews, and the local thinking on what's reasonable, not necessarily what holds up in court, but certainly what's reasonable and fair. Next slide, if I could, please. That local legendary leadership, and I put it in those terms, borrowing from the CARL program, Kansas Agriculture Rural Leadership, an excellent program that the board supports. Local legendary leadership are elected onto these boards to provide that perspective. Next slide, please. They do that through the adoption, the construct of the GMD Act is to do that through a management program. I've heard it described from the Department of Ag that the management program seems to be a backdoor to rules. Well, on the contrary, it's a front door to rules. The whole construct of the GMD Act is that the board will put together a management program, a set of concepts and thinking, and then whatever rules are needed from whichever agency to implement that, they'll go seek those and have that conversation with those state officials. It's not a back door, it's intended to be a front door. We operate a set of thinking under a management program that's adopted by the board after public hearings to review that management program. Excuse me, next slide, please. So GMD 3 is undertaking an update, and it's a quite extensive update of the management program as a result of examples like the one in Meade County I just tried to describe. There needs to be consistent thinking behind how we are acting and using water in this very important part of the Kansas economy. Next slide. We also found it's helpful to list core values that management program is built on. Sometimes it can be a challenge to work with relationships of partner organizations if we don't understand the values that we're coming from and how we're describing what needs to happen. Professor Griggs would simply say, well, it's just the law. Well, but there's more to applying the law, and Vice Chair Orr, I think, hit the nail on the head yesterday with his question on what's the difference between first in time, first in right, or prior appropriation, and the public interest. So these are the core values: water risk, individual responsibility, community fairness, and stewardship. Next slide, please. The management program that the board has put together, draft revised, because it has to first be reviewed by the chief engineer for legality, make sure it's consistent with the laws and policies of the state. And so we're 6 months or more into that with the chief engineer, the second chief engineer to work with it. And I'm really excited for Chief Engineer Earl Lewis. I think he's going to be an excellent chief engineer for the state. There are 9 areas of activities in that draft revised management program. I'm just going to touch on a couple because I don't have much time left here. Next slide, please. Water conservation. We get tripped up in terms sometimes, and so the board thought it was important to describe in that management program the 2 types that they're focusing on as a groundwater area. Okay, there's use efficiency. Use efficiency is great. It eliminates waste. It adds value to every drop of water used, but it also assures that we consume every drop. So it alone is not good enough if we're going to try to conserve and extend the aquifer. So type 2 is maintaining aquifer storage. Again, for the management program, it's important to realize what we have in the bank and to what extent we're making deposits and to what extent we're making withdrawals. So managing demand and replenishing storage are 2 key focuses under water conservation under the GMD 3 management program. Next slide, please. More thinking, the Ark River, a lot of history there. The first original action, as was alluded to by Professor Griggs yesterday, came from the Ark River relationship with Colorado. First original action of any state on interstate water back in 1902. And the relationship continues today with the concern for water quality. So the thinking that we have there is to not only operate the Western Water Conservation Projects Fund, which is the remainder of those damage funds that were quantified in that last Supreme Court case with Colorado on compact violations, but also water quality mitigation, compact quality compliance, and import of alternative supplies. That's the thinking. Next slide, please. Every year under the Western Water Conservation Projects, we put together a report to the legislature on the funds, the fiduciary job of the GMD, and the project activities. And I've provided that as an attachment to our testimony. Next slide, please. I'll highlight one point there. We brought up to the Ark River Compact Administration this year specifically a request that the member states research the question of compact compliance regarding water quality or usability of that water. Water quality is basically the amount and type of material in the water, and sometimes the material in the water renders that water not very usable. And so you either have to treat it, in which you lose some of it, or you have to add water, fresh water, to mitigate it. So it's a quantity question as much as a quality question in usability. Next slide, please. Also, trying to find ways to encourage the state and other partners on an interstate level on water transfers. It's a very big set of issues there. I think Professor Griggs mentioned yesterday, pointed out in Western, basically the Nevada example, about groundwater being transferred. Well, in case of surface water, if it's not used in Kansas, it goes downstream, right? And there are uses for navigation and other in the Missouri, but the Missouri certainly presents the largest volume of water opportunity for Kansas to further develop its water resources. And there's a lot there, but the board simply took a step and transferred a truckload of water from the Missouri high flow conditions to the dry Ark River in southwest Kansas and walked everybody through the permitting process of that. We also intend to do that again this summer. We've got all of our permits from state agencies except DWR and the chief engineer. But we have partners with the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District on the South Platte to send them a truckload of water. And there are others that we're talking with as well, trying to develop interstate partnerships and thinking process to see where we can go with it in a practical sense. Next slide. We also work with our sister organizations, groundwater management districts in other states under the GMD Association, as well as the National Water Resources Association, and providing testimony and support on the Hill in Washington, D.C. Those relationships, next slide, please, helped us provide testimony with Senator Roberts' Ag Committee on his field hearing several years ago. And so one of our board members, Clay Scott, was able to provide testimony on water to that hearing. Next slide, please. Our mission statement in our draft revised management program is act on a shared commitment to conserve and develop the water supply of the district, to grow the social, economic, and natural resource well-being for current and future generations in the public interest. And with that, that concludes my slides. I did want to, if I could take a moment longer, a couple of, the rest of the story is something I want to touch base on from yesterday's testimony. I think there were a couple of states that were identified by Professor Griggs, namely Colorado and New Mexico, and how they handle their water and potential water courts. Hearing processes are important as an alternative to going to court. And so, so Kansas, I think, could do a better job in having a hearing process in which people aren't burdened so heavily like the school teacher in Meade. Almost impossible task of trying to take exception to the state's mysterious determinations. In fact, in that case, it was determined by DWR that there's no evidence there will ever be impairment in the Ogallala Aquifer. Well, those kind of statements are just mysterious. I don't know how else to frame it. Certainly the Garrettson Brothers versus American Warrior would indicate otherwise. Colorado, they formed a groundwater commission. It's not just water courts. They formed a groundwater commission. And our board, in fact, engaged that groundwater commission a couple years ago, simply to provide information. And of course, we were from another state, so we were found to have no standing. But the point I want to make there is they have a hearing process, but they have yet to hold a hearing in the High Plains Aquifer because their rules are designed to not have a hearing. Now, in their statute, it says when there's a complaint, there shall be a hearing, and when there's a hearing, the chief engineer will determine how much water is available beyond what it takes to deplete the aquifer 40% in 100 years. Well, the state doesn't want to make that determination, so they work to not hold a hearing. There's just the rest of the story that you need to be aware of. Also, in New Mexico, they have addressed their Ogallala, and they have put a clock on it, kind of like the 40% in 25 years. And their courts have ruled, once you put a clock on a groundwater supply, you no longer have water rights in perpetuity. Something to keep in mind. Idaho groundwater, they adopt a Groundwater Act from ours. And it adds that the district can represent its members in matters before political bodies and in court. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up and take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Groundwater Management District number 4. If you would, please identify yourself.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I am Shannon Kenyon. I am the manager for the Groundwater Management District number 4 in Colby, Kansas. I have previously provided you guys with some written testimony that kind of gives you the summary of GMD4 and some of the projects and things going on in our region. Today, I really want to kind of focus on some of the nuts and bolts of those awesome things that we're doing up there and really making a success of that. I'm going to start off right now with our mission statement, which the purpose of the district is the proper conservation and management of the groundwater resources. It is also to provide local landowners and water users with the ability to be directly involved in the process by establishing their own regulations regarding the resource. Moreover, all necessary research and education are to be conducted under local direction. Finally, the district is to cooperate with other local, state, and federal agencies in their endeavors. And I do think that we are fulfilling every component of that mission statement wholeheartedly. We have an 11-member board of directors that meets most monthlies. They are the ones that do all of the decision making. I'm just the manager that provides the data to help them make that decision process go. Some of the things that we are using that have been provided to us by the legislature in Northwest Kansas. I'm going to start with the multi-year flex accounts. We currently have 42 of those within our district. They were really more popular back when we were coming out of the drought of 2012. And we had quite a few more, but now that we've started the local enhanced management area process, that's a 5-year allocation, and so folks are utilizing the LEMA tool a little bit more than they are the multi-year flex accounts. At the same time, a lot of that multi-year flex account was being developed coming out of the drought term permit. A little bit prior to that, GMD4 was working on what we called our high priority areas. There are areas within the district that had a significant amount of decline in the Ogallala Aquifer. So with that, numerous public meetings were had in each one of those 6 areas. The 6th area, Sheridan County and part of Thomas County, said we need to do something. And so I think there were like over 70 public meetings that were had in that region. And with the law at the current time, the only solution was to put it into an intensive groundwater use control area. And the GMD4 Board of Directors, as well as the stakeholders, said, nuh-uh, we want this local. We want to be able to control this. And so that's when the legislator provided us then with the local enhanced management area tool as part of the Groundwater Management District Act. As soon as that was enacted, beginning in 2013, the Sheridan 6 Local Enhanced Management Area was born. In that area, it consists of 99 sections, which is a square mile. We have over 183 irrigation wells, 7 stock water wells, 2 that are multi-use irrigation and stock water, and 1 recreation water right. Out of that, what they get on the irrigation is they can use 55 inches over the course of 5 years, which averages to 11 inches per year, but they can utilize more or less providing they do not exceed that 55 inches in any one given year. They also cannot exceed their authorized quantity under their water right in any one given year. So it provides a lot of flexibility and they cut back on years when it's wet, and they can pump a little bit more in years when it's dry, and we're definitely seeing that happening now. We've had some wet years, but we had a really dry year this year. Last year, in 2019, they pumped their lowest ever that they've ever pumped in any one given year. This year, they've pumped almost double, but considering the amount of rainfall, they're just doing a wonderful job at managing their water resources and cutting back when it's wet and utilizing it when they need it. The ultimate goal of the first Sheridan 6 Lima, it went from 2013 to 2017, was a 20% reduction in historical pumping. They actually overachieved that with plus or minus about 32% overall. So it was a great success. With that, we saw not only just a positive impact on the aquifer, but we saw a great kind of a sociological impact on the region as well. Instead of talking about bushels per acre, they're now talking more of bushels per inch, and it's almost a contest between them, some of them, as to how much little water they can use and still get the yields that they were getting. It's been really positive. Stock water, we do have a large feedlot right smack dab in the middle of that Hoxie feed yard. He agreed. I mean, the state provides 15 gallons per head per day. He says, I'll go 12. If I got to reduce the number of cattle in my feedlot to make that work, I will. And he has done that, and it's really been a great relationship between the local producers and the feedlot. He provides a little bit more money for the grain, the local grain, so they bring it there, and it's really been a great relationship there. So towards the end of that Sheridan 6 Lima there in 2017, we had an advisory committee, and we said, hey, what do you think? Do we want to redo this? Unanimously, yes, but they included a carryover up to 5 inches over the course of 5 years. So they get on top of the 55 inches, if they had it in their account remaining at the end of 2017, they got to carry over another 5 inches, which would give them another inch in case of a drought year or something like that. So that really helped with that. There was also an economic study done in that region by Dr. Bill Golden of K-State. He showed that those within the Sheridan 6 Lima were making more, being more profitable inside the Lima than they were as compared to a radius of up to 2 miles outside of the Lima boundaries. So that was also another thing. So with the positives coming from that, we looked, the board of directors says, hey, what if we were to take this broader, look at the district as a whole? And so they started talking about a GMD4 Lima. Not all areas of GMD4 have a decline problem, but they focused in on those townships that do. They looked at rainfall, which can vary greatly from the western part of our district to the eastern part of our district. We looked at the NRCS's net irrigation requirements for corn, as well as the decline by township, as provided by KGS, their Kansas Geological Survey. They are excellent at providing us with great water table data. So beginning in 2018, which goes through 2022, we have what we call the GMD4 Lima on top of the second shared and sixth local enhanced management area also. Right now, my board of directors is eager for me to begin gathering data. They want to look into the next 5 years, you know. I anticipate the shared and sixth Lima to kind of pretty much mirror the last two as we go into starting one in 2023. The GMD4 Lima, we're probably going to kind of, for an analogy, kind of bring it into the shop, change the oil, kind of see what nuts and bolts need to be fixed, and tweak it a little bit to send it out even better than the first one. One other thing that's going to play a big part in that is thanks to the Kansas Water Office and the Kansas Geological Survey, we're getting funding to help us update our model. So we'll have a new model with very accurate, up-to-date information that will help us make better science-based decisions on what those declines look like and what-if scenarios for potential reductions and how much. You don't want to pinch somebody back too much, but if we can base those pinches, you know, based on science and model data that's up to date, it's just all the more better for everybody involved. So. Let's see. Oh, another thing that we've got going on that I really think is great are the water conservation areas that through the Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Division of Water Resources. We have 7 of those in our area. Those are a voluntary program. And they have to be more restrictive even than their Lima quantity. And so with 7 of those already in place too, on top of their Lima quantities, they've turned out to be very, very successful also. So. With all these restrictions and things like that, we feel that we can't just start restricting folks and say, hey, you know, we need to provide them with the tools also with it to make it available and doable for them. So we have had a cost share program on soil moisture probes as well as variable rate irrigation technology. We have currently funded for 244 of those probes to be put in the ground, 24 variable rate irrigations with a little over $260,000 going into that. Each probe, we're learning saves about 20% water because they turn on later in the spring and turn off earlier in the summer. Another thing that we're doing is we have implemented just last year an app. It's called Tap H2O. Where you can go out and snap a picture of your meter and what it does. You know, farm hands, anybody can go out and snap a picture of your meter if you're enrolled, and you get a report as to how much water you've used against your water right, as well as how much you've got remaining in your Lima account. It'll give you all sorts of other data too on inches per acre, you name it. It's going pretty quick. We've got about 300 folks signed up using that app just in the last year. Been real successful, as well as we're currently developing what we're calling our certified irrigator program, which is very similar to what Texas and Colorado are doing, but they do it in person. With the COVID mess that was going on, everybody going online, we decided we're going to develop something online, an online program to where producers can do this in their own time and learn about water saving technologies, better management, and all that good stuff. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and I thank you for your time, and wait for questions later.
Very good.
Thank you.
There will be questions, I'll guarantee it. For some reason, we've lost our screen up there on the screen, so and I don't know how to get it back. I don't know why it won't let us do that screen. Nevertheless, Oren is online. Are you ready to go?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Take it
Can you
away.
hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Good morning, and Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the time this morning. My name is Oren Farrell, and I am the district manager for Big Bend GMD number 5 in Stafford, Kansas. I apologize for not being able to be there in person this morning, but had a few conflicts I just could not get out of later on this morning. So please bear with me, but we'll get through this together. GMD 5 is what I like to say is a very unique piece of Kansas. We have a little bit of everything in our district. We cover about 2.5 million acres inside of our boundaries. Only 570,000 of those acres are actually irrigated. But we have water quality issues, water quantity issues, surface water issues, a little bit of everything we are working to deal with. We were established in 1976, much like the other GMDs. We're number 5 in line. We were established in March of 76 and cover all or part of 8 counties in south central Kansas. We do have 2 wetlands of international importance within our district. Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Refuge that is managed by Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and Tourism. And then, as you probably are aware of, Quivira National Wildlife Refuge that is managed by the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We are, like I said, unique. We have water quantity plenty. We have areas that have a saturated thickness of over 200, 250 feet. We have areas that have a saturated thickness, that's the thickness of that water below ground, of less than 40 or 30 feet. But our water tables are variable, as always. Some areas are less than 5 feet to water. So a good post hole digger, and as you're putting in a corner post, you're going to be hitting the water table, and you're going to be working quick to get that filled back in. We do have areas that are deep, 100 foot to water, but overall, our water tables stay very stable over time. In fact, the Kansas Geological Survey, as Tim showed earlier on, most areas of the district, by and large, have less than 10 feet difference since pre-development time. That's pre-1950 time period before there's development within this region. We take a lot of pride in that. We take that very seriously. We do not have as much of a quantity issue, but a timing issue. So as that water table does go down in the summer months, so does the stream flow. And then in the fall months, when the streams need to flow for these refuges of importance, they don't have the flow. And so it's a timing issue. And so we are working through those issues for Quivira right now. And I'm hesitant to get into too much detail there because I could take probably 30, 40 minutes just talking on that one issue, but I won't belabor that today unless you have specific questions about it. Over our 45-year history, we feel that we've been rather proactive in the proper management and proactive management of the aquifer system. In the 80s, we implemented well change restrictions on how close those wells could be to each other, as well as sustainable yield requirements and water quality requirements, because that realization that we had naturally occurring poor quality water was coming to a forefront very early on in our history. In the early 90s, we required water flow meters for all diversions, both surface and groundwater, in our district boundaries, as well as implementing safe field, a more tight safe field requirement that actually closed the district border to border. And so in our district, you cannot apply for a large use application of water today. That's been that way since about 1993. So in the time since, you have to manage the district in a way that you can't get new water. So what do you do with those permits over time, since you can't get new? So you have to change those permits. And so we've been developing over the last 20 years several programs to help manage and move that water around. Very proudly, we have the only water bank in the state. And again, I could spend 20, 30 minutes specifically on the Central Kansas Water Bank Association because we're so proud of it. But I won't belabor that too much either. We also have a very high resolution hydrologic model that was implemented in 2010. It is the only groundwater model in the state that is completely funded privately by our district. We own that model and utilize it and share it with other agencies and public to make good decisions going forward. That model is in need of updating, and we are looking to that probably within this next year or two to get that updated. But there are other issues going on in our district that are tying up our resources and time that are taking a higher priority. We take our obligation to manage, conserve, and protect all water rights within our boundaries very seriously, and will do what is necessary to fulfill that charge going forward. And I know I'm short, but I figured I would keep it short today because the real reason that the groundwater management districts are here today is to answer questions that you, the committee, may have. And I will stand for those questions now.
Thank you, sir. So we'll open up questions. So for folks with questions, number one, you state your question, and number two, you have to state who you would like to have answer that question. So the first question is from Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for GMD2. And first, for full disclosure, I need to tell you that I served on the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission for 6 years and became rather familiar, at least at that time, with GMD2 because there was many times that the recommendation or approval, whatever you want to call it, from GMD2 was sought as we did planning. I'd like to ask specifically about the area between the two rivers. I know that that's, I think, somewhat at the south end of the Equus beds, if it's even close, but it is also an area of a high water table and has been designated within the 30-year comprehensive plan as environmentally vulnerable. But even given that, we have, for instance, placed a large Walmart at the intersection of 53rd and Meridian, which has, of course, become surrounded with fast food places, or at least several of them. And I just was wondering if the tendency to ignore the advice from GMD2 continues.
Thank you very much. This is Tim Bays with GMD2. I appreciate the question. Yeah, the area that you describe has been an area of some controversy for a number of years due to the very shallow water table and the development that's occurred in that area, particularly with groundwater pits. These developments generally require dirt, particularly around, let's say, the Maze area, where depth of water probably right now is less than a foot after this recent rainfall in some areas. So, yeah, I think we worked through some of those issues when Sedgwick County worked on what they call their stormwater manual. And I was lucky enough to serve on that technical advisory committee and tried to control that. It's still some issue with drainage into groundwater pits. It concerns us quite a bit. They generally excavate a large area. They need the dirt, and then Sedgwick County or the city tells them they need to put the drainage into that. Well, as you can imagine, if you're putting drainage with contaminants into the aquifer, that's not a good thing. So we continue to work through that, but I think the relationship is better. In answer to your question, still some challenges with some developers. We're trying to do some education and permit conditions to require that runoff to be treated before it enters into the groundwater pit. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I am at least a little bit familiar with the groundwater pits, and the tendency has been to go out and get the sand, gravel, and haul it away, create a big pit, which then becomes a lake. Then you build homes around it. That's kind of been the process, and is one of the aspects that has contributed to urban sprawl. Thank you very much. It was these have been good presentations, very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the presenters. I have a lot of questions, but we'll be sure to limit them. I learned a lot from your presentation and really appreciate all of your insights. So I think my first is kind of a general question. I might I think I'll pose it and then I'll see who might be able to answer it. We've just heard a lot about the overarching issues of water quality and quantity in Kansas. And we've heard about a variety of solutions to this, but I'm just wondering, as the people who are on the ground doing a lot of this work, what do you feel like are the most, or are the best potential solutions that could use a statewide lens to address some of these issues for you all? And that's pretty broad, so I do apologize.
Pick your poison. One of you step forward.
Mark Rude, Southwest Kansas. That is a challenging question. One of the things I want to note is that there is extremely good communication between the state agencies today. Not so much in the past, but the world keeps turning and we get more data and better communication between the agencies. Kansas is doing the best it's ever done, in my opinion, on the consideration of quality and quantity. And I don't know if I have a suggestion there, because there's efficiency in focus on agencies for their focus of practice. And then their community of practice is important too, and who they're communicating and working with routinely. There's still some, tendency of walls to be there. But for example, Department of Ag Division of Water Resources routinely corresponds with KDHE so that there's quality quantity correlation there. So I don't know that I have any recommendations.
I just figured I'd ask, since we've heard about it so much. I do appreciate that. And I do have one more question, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also for Mr. Root, if you don't mind. I was interested to hear, I know in GMD3 in particular, you've been dealing with the overappropriation of water rights, and then, you talked about how with, possibly the changing of precipitation and things, there's less recharge in the aquifer. So I know you all are doing a lot with your conservation efforts, and I was just wondering if there's any sort of long-term strategic plan for trying to approach a more neutral consumption of the aquifer for long-term sustainability. I don't know if that's feasible for you all, but I would just be interested to know, what the discussion is around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Again, Mark Rude. There is inevitable a point of sustainability that we will get to whether we do anything or nothing. It's the level of economy that we want to have and preserve going forward. So it's a constant preponderance of the good and evil of promoting agriculture and the strengths that we have. For example, in Southwest Kansas, we have space, we have climate, we have forage and grain, we have kill space. So for animal feeding, animal agriculture, which is a huge driver in the economy, we have a lot to offer. And so recently, the Department of Ag has promoted that heavily. We have sister states locally that don't prohibit new appropriations of water, and we continue to have friendly conversations with them. But certainly we want to get to a point. We don't have a target goal of economy because we want it to be as high as possible and as strong as possible with the conditions globally in the markets, but at the same time plan for the future. And so the best we've been able to come up with is a plan to try to ratchet up limits. And I say it that way because Professor Griggs said yesterday about, well, he quoted our legal counsel out of GMD3, Mike Ramsey, in an article that he once wrote about 40% in 25 years being a standard for water availability for water use. That's not very long into the future. But there's more to that story, too. Why not? The ex-chief engineer, Pope, said, why not 40% 100 years? Well, there's more to that, too. The conversation is we put together a program that considers all the elements, not just hydrology, but economy and conservation and quality, and then work with our partners, our communities of practice, to do a better job. And the hope is, with the new models, better information, that we will get to that point that's better than where we're headed, invariably if we do nothing, but we're not. We're doing it a lot. The industries are doing a lot. It's amazing where we are today compared to 20 years ago. So I don't know if I'm dancing around it, but it's hard to pick a point. The state water planning process has done that in the past, and it's sort of arbitrary, and there it is, and we blow past it, and what do we do about it? But we keep trying to do a better job, not only for our members and their investments, because it's $200,000 to redrill an irrigation well nowadays. We don't want to approve those and then tomorrow have them shut off under prior appropriation. So there's a lot of moving parts, and we're just going to continue to do a better job. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you, Mr. Rudd. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Orr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I really appreciated all of your comments. I appreciate understanding how much passion and concern and interest you have in local problems. And I think that's the key to what you folks are doing, and I really do appreciate that. Just a general question, I think, and it really hasn't been addressed here. I think the two biggest waste of water in Kansas is the Missouri River and the lack of desalinating water. And Mark, if I know that you didn't talk about this, but could you address that for me, please?
Rather quickly, if you.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman, for the question. And don't get me started is almost my answer. But yeah, the charges that we have from the legislature as far as goals for water in Kansas includes developing our sources. And when we have in Southwest Kansas alone over 65 million acre feet of available storage space, and we have high flows in the Missouri River, of course, the obvious thing is, why are we letting that happen? And so we have conversations with the Water Office and the Army Corps of Engineers. We want to get that started. When you talk about protecting communities along the Missouri River and agriculture, and you're evaluating that flood protection, why can't part of that be moving some of that into storage? And a number of years ago, when the Army Corps released storage space from Milford, Tuttle, and Perry to support barge traffic, because they didn't want to release it from other reservoirs in other states, it was like, it was not, it didn't seem to make much sense to Governor Brownback at the time, nor to us. And so I guess to try to be brief here, we're working on it with partners. That's maybe too brief, sorry.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, GMD4, my home area, so. You mentioned an economic study that was done by Kansas State.
Correct.
Would you be able to supply a copy of that to Damien, and he'll get it to the committee members?
Sure,
So that
not a
we
problem.
can vote that.
Yes, be happy to.
And then you said there's now another Lima, the GMD 4, or another Lima number 4, or whatever it's called. And that started when?
2018.
And what area does that cover?
That covers, well, it's by township. It's on our website. I could also send you a map of that. It's kind of complicated. We looked at decline areas by township. So it's really based on, it's kind of a color-coded scheme. So it moves from west to east. It's based on townships. If you don't have a decline problem, you're not in those areas. So, yeah.
Well, we've all heard about what the Lima is doing and the good work they've done out west, and you need to be complimented for that, for sure. That's been a great success. And,
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Orrin, did you have anything you would like to say before we close it up?
I do not, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Orrin. And one second. What I want to hear back from the GMDs, all of them, is we've asked everybody that's come before the committee, we want a detail of your budget, where the money's coming from, where it's going. We want your mission statement. We want how you do what you do. You told us some of that, but we'd like to see some of that in writing. And then along with that, your organization, your reporting structure, that sort of thing, so that we have an idea of how you function and where you function. We've got an idea of where you are now, but we'd like to see a little more detail on that. We'd appreciate that. Sean, final words.
Thank you, Chairman Highland, members of the committee. I hope if you take nothing else away from today, it's that each of these 5 GMDs faces very different challenges and very different opportunities. They're very unique ecosystems in many ways throughout the state. The water challenges in terms of sustainability and long-term aquifer in GMD 1, where the water is really limited already, is very different than it is in GMD 2 or GMD 5. Additionally, the changes from the time when these GMDs were, the challenges when these GMDs were formed in the mid-1970s to 2020 are very different. You can imagine the challenges that the legislature faced in terms of tax policy and economic development in 1972 when the GMD Act was enacted was very different. In the 30s, if you wanted to irrigate, you better be close to a creek and be able to dig a ditch to get to your field. In the 50s and 60s, as irrigation technology and center pivots popped up, we had widespread development of irrigation in western Kansas, and as a state policy, it was to drive economic development, to use that water, to put it to beneficial use and not be wasted. Through the 70s, 80s, 90s, as we appropriated and in some cases over-appropriated the focus of the state and particularly of the local entities who saw that my well once pumped 1,200 gallons a minute, and now that there's 6 more wells around me, it pumps 600 gallons a minute, began to key off in people's minds. And you have seen the development at the local level in many cases of these water conservation areas and the LEMAs and technology-driven solutions. So I don't want people to think that the focus of the GMDs in 1973 is the same as it is in 2020. There's a very significant difference both in time span and in geography. So I hope you understand the unique challenges each one's faced and the way that they're attempting to overcome those challenges and take advantage of those opportunities. And I thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Sean. And to all the speakers, thank you very much for driving in, number one, and the unique and interesting presentations. Thank you very much for that. We learned a great deal, as always. We appreciate it. Alert to Zach and Victoria, the research and our revisers. We need a copy of the, what was it called? The GMD Act, what was it called? What's the name on it?
The Groundwater Management District Act?
There you go. We need a copy of that for the committee members, please.
Will do.
Thank you, Victoria. Committee, that's all we have for today. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.